So some of what we've heard back so far are a kind of a list of priority actions. This is, relevant to today's topic of strategies and actions that we want to pursue. So some of the actions that we've seen people are interested in include actions related to power resiliency, so making sure that the electric grid is able to function and recover quickly after a storm, upgrading infrastructure like roads and culverts, identifying risk areas. We saw interest in that, so just knowing where these different flood hazard zones are, for example. Assisting vulnerable residents who may have mobility issues or be homebound and things like that. Coordinating state and local response. There was a comment about concern about local communities and state and National Guard responses being able to coordinate with one another. So that kind of coordination, and then general education and outreach actions. So we're taking this public input and also kind of our own, what we've learned from you and the regional actions and so on, to try to get a set of goals, objectives, and then actions into every hazard mitigation plan annex. So just to kind of back up a little bit and define some of these terms. So there's goals, objectives, and then strategies or actions. They're kind of interchangeable terms. A goal is broad, intangible, abstract, kind of a broader focus, a broader idea of what you want to achieve to reduce losses from hazards. Objectives are specific, tangible, and measurable. The measurable aspect is key. Targets that reduce losses from hazards. And then the strategies and actions are the specific steps to achieve those objectives. So an example here that we'll walk through, a goal might be to create a reliable, resilient utility system, make sure that electricity is able to function well. An objective in that might be to reduce the frequency of power outages. You can count how many power outages occur in a year, and you can measure when you reduce the number of power outages that happen. And then the specific strategies and actions that you use to achieve that objective, to achieve that goal, might be trimming trees near power lines, installing backup power, building microgrids, or coordinating with the utility provider to make sure that they're using best practices. So we looked at the next couple slides. This slide and the next slide are looking back at the previous set of plans that we're now updating. So looking at the prior mitigation goals, we can see that hazard mitigation are the big words. These are word clouds where the size of the word reflects the number of times that word is repeated. So we looked at all of the goals from all of your plans, put them all into this program, and it spits out this kind of map of how popular different words were. So hazard mitigation were the kind of top words that we saw. Planning, reducing damages, you can see up there on the right. And implementation was a big goal. So we can kind of look at this and see what some of the different popular goal terms were. Funding is also on there. And then the next slide is the specific actions. So there were a lot of words, there were a lot of actions. So some of these are going to be too small to see. But we see a lot of actions related to flooding. Facility is up there, critical facilities, roads, dams, things like that. So we can see how these kind of different assets in the community are identified in these different actions. I want to point out that we also see consider. The purple consider word up there is pretty big. We're going to be removing the term consider from the actions in this plan. This is as FEMA has changed what they want out of a hazard mitigation plan. So things like consider upgrading a culvert, the action will just be upgrading the culvert. So we're kind of reducing the number of times that words that kind of couch the action and make it something that you'll think about, but just have the action in there. So just something to think about moving forward. So just again, some of the actions that we've seen in the previous plans, a lot of focus on improving sheltering, planning for evacuations, improving improving like road infrastructure, things such as culvert capacity, standby power, and general critical facility hardening, joining or improving scores in the community rating system was a common action that we saw for a few communities. We see a lot about community emergency response teams, the CERT teams, and making sure that they're able to operate well. Emergency alerts, acquisition and open space. So this is, maybe acquiring repetitive loss properties or acquiring just existing open space and making sure that that stays protected. And then expanding firefighting water and making sure that wildfires can be effectively fought. So those are some of the actions that we saw in the previous plan. We have been, as you all know, I believe, we've been having a lot of meetings with the communities to identify actions moving forward. A lot of this consists of looking at those previous actions and figuring out which will be carried forward and which have been completed and so on. We've also just been asking communities, what are the new priorities and what new actions do you want to pursue? So these are some of the ones that we've seen. We've seen conducting flood studies, looking at stormwater regulations and making sure that those are adequate, buying out repetitive loss properties, stabilizing riverbanks, upgrading dams, repairing roads and drainage and culverts, expanding public water service, and so on. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but a key thing is to think about which of these categories they fall under, which of these FEMA hazard mitigation categories they apply to. So we have some that apply to prevention, property protection, structural projects, natural resource protection. There was an action to daylight a stream and restore the floodplain access. That would be a natural resource protection action. A fair number of emergency services actions like flood warnings and shelter improvements. In my review so far, I didn't see any public education actions, but those will end up in there maybe from being carried forward, or we'll add new ones. But we want to make sure that we hit all of those different categories. Okay, I think I maybe went a little bit too fast, but we now have a guest presentation from Jessica Leclerc about sustainable CT. Before she starts, maybe I'll just say that, we're looking at all these previous actions and some of the new actions so far that we've identified in an effort to think about what actions we want to include in the plan and think about what we haven't identified yet as actions. So as we're moving forward through this presentation, that's what we should be thinking about. And the sustainable CT is going to give us an example of some of the actions that we can be thinking of.
May I share my screen?
Yes, go ahead.
Excellent. And can you all see a PowerPoint?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we see the main screen, not like a full screen PowerPoint.
How about that?
Yeah. Great.
There we go. Well, good morning, everyone, and many thanks for having me to your meeting. As Noah mentioned, my name is Jessica Leclerc, and I'm with Sustainable CT. And today, I'm just going to give you a really quick overview of what Sustainable CT is, walk you through the certification process, and talk about some supports that we have available to towns who are in the program. Sustainable CT is a statewide municipal certification program intended to help towns advance their overall sustainability, which can include resilience. At the core of the program, we have a menu of actions that cities and towns can pick from to work on to get points that count towards their overall certification. And the menu is very broad, and I'll show you a slide in just a few slides that walks you through all of the various categories. So when we say sustainability, excuse me, we mean more than the traditional environmental sense, but we include that. On top, we layer on things like transportation, arts and culture, public health, housing, local businesses, really everything that makes a community a place where people want to live, work, and play. So here it is. We've tried to create a program that's relatively straightforward. So we have a menu of sustainability best practices, and we call them actions. There's over 70. The actions fall within these 12 different categories. And again, they're broad. So towns might be working on actions that will lead to land and natural resources, improve land and natural resources. You can be working on energy actions, materials management, whatever fits the bill for your town, whatever speaks to you now and in the future. Each action was designed to have as many benefits as possible. And you can see here, there's 8 different benefit icons that we've selected to associate with individual actions. And oftentimes you pick an action for one thing, which might be climate resilience in this case, but there'll be other benefits that tag along. And that was done specifically to really try to maximize the bang for your buck as a community as you're moving through the multitude of actions that are in the program. Sustainable CT is voluntary, it's no cost. And at this point in time, we have 117 towns who are in the program. And if you're not in yet, that's okay. We'd love to work with you. And you might be asking, why should I join? Well, this is a recognition program. We've certified 61 towns to date, which is really exciting. So we launched Sustainable CT in November of 2017. So we're 3 years and change, and 61 towns over that course of time have moved through the program and gotten certified. So they now have a badge, a recognition that shows that they are active on sustainability issues. This is something they care about and they're successful with, which can be something a town can use to brand themselves as they're looking to attract and retain residents and businesses in the community, which could be pretty huge. We have funding and resources available to our participating towns, and we intend our supports to be implementing supports rather than rewards. So we want to help you along on the journey. And if there's something you need that you're not getting, we'd love to hear from you so we can try to tailor the program to best meet the very diverse needs of the communities across Connecticut. And the last one that I'll touch on here is the partnerships benefit of participating. And this is something it's a soft benefit, but we've heard it from towns who have gotten certified that because we take a very broad look of sustainability, that towns are working across different commissions, they're working across different staff departments with nonprofits or regional entities like the COG or health district to get stuff done and to learn some of the cool stuff that's already happening and underway. I often get calls from towns saying, wow, I did not know we were doing X, Y, or Z. I just had a meeting with this group in town. It's amazing. I can't believe our town is so cool. And I can't wait to tell others about it. So there's a lot of this learning and weaving of civic infrastructure that might come out of the process of completing the various actions in the program. So as I mentioned, there are 117 towns in the program. 61 of those towns have achieved either bronze or silver, which are 2 levels of certification. And those 61 towns have completed almost 2,000 of our actions. So there's a lot of great work that's happened across the state and that's underway already. And I wanted to flag this. It's a screenshot of our homepage, the bottom left-hand corner. There's this map, and it's an interactive map. So you can go in, and we think it's a helpful tool, but you can go in and see the certification reports of towns who have achieved bronze or silver. So you can go in and see policies, planning documents, ordinances, and see in real time what it looked like for these towns to get points in the various areas. So we use it all of the time when a town asks, how do I do an open space inventory? How do I do an open space plan? What does that look like? Well, we can just show you 25, 30 different examples of that. And for towns who have gotten certified, they have a nice report. Everything's in one spot. It's pulled together, digestible for the public or others to go in and see the neat things that are happening in a community. So an example, Weathersfield was certified silver in October. So kudos to Weathersfield. They got 520 points. You can go and check out their report, read the policies, read the plans, read the ordinances, see photos, and it's a nice snapshot of where Weathersfield was in 2020. Want to give a shout out to the participating towns of the Naugatuck Valley COG. So there are 10, and we're thrilled to be working with you all. And of the 10, 3 have achieved certification. So again, huge kudos for all of the work that's happening. Bristol was silver certified in 2020, which was really awesome to work with them to get that threshold. We've got Bethlehem, Cheshire, Naugatuck, Oxford, Prospect, Seymour, Thompson. Waterbury, another 2020 certified town, got bronze, did amazing work. And Woodbury, certified bronze in 2019. Again, another awesome town, really fun to work with, and did a lot of cool stuff during that time. So thanks to everyone who's in the program. If your town's not on this list, but you want it to be, you can join at any time. Again, no cost, relatively easy entry point. I'll talk about a bit more about that if you're interested. But yeah, it's a flexible program, and we want to make sure that it meets the needs of all of the towns across the state. So if you're not seeing something you want to see, please let us know. As Noah mentioned, there are many ways sustainable CT work can align with the actions within your natural hazard mitigation plan. So we've got 70 actions in the program with sub actions. So it's highly likely there are, gosh, I don't even know, 20, 30, 40, I don't know, 40 plus actions that align. So the work that you're doing as you're working through your natural hazard mitigation plan, if you're in sustainable CT, you're probably, checking the boxes that need to be checked. Just a couple that come to mind quickly: develop an open space plan, plan for long-term recovery, assess climate vulnerability, implement low impact development. And again, the list can continue. We'd be happy to talk with any town to see where some of those pairings are. That's something we do quite often, to listen as to what you're up to and sort of point out where those alignments might lie within the sustainable CT action list. And that last bullet there, we have updated the program for 2021. And every year we update based on what we're learning from towns. So we've added more actions, more categories, more flexibility for 2021. And we'll do that as we move forward. So we want to make sure we continue to iterate to make a product that works for every town in Connecticut, no matter where you are, where you're starting from, or what your interests might be. So quickly on the certification process, the first thing that a town does to join the program is pass a resolution at the Board of Selectmen or Town Council level. We do have sample text available if that's helpful, but the resolution, it really just tells us three things. You're interested, there's a point of contact, which is someone who we can reach out to make sure you have everything that you need, and that you'll create a sustainability team, which is just a grouping of people who will carry out the program. And that sustainability team is totally flexible. It's up to you. It could be an existing committee or commission, staff, a mixture of staff and volunteers, a new group, ad hoc people, come in, they work on an action, and then they move on, whatever it is. You know how to get things done in your town, so we didn't want to put bounds around that. So you pass the resolution, you register, you get a blue dot on the map, and then you work through the program at your own pace. You're never committed to get certified ever. It might be that you just do a couple actions a year and you are advancing sustainability in your town and achieving your goals. That's great. We do give credit for past actions. So towns who do have certification as a goal often look within the work that they've done and the work that we have, our action list rather, and see where there's alignment, and then identify the sustainability base and move forward from there. This is what certification looks like. In 2018, our very first year, we had 22 towns get certified. In 2019, we had 32 towns join the ranks. And this year in 2020, we had 17 towns get certified during the pandemic, which blew us away. We really didn't know if towns would have the capacity or interest to be moving forward with sustainable CT efforts while amidst this global pandemic. But what we saw were many towns using the actions as recovery response tools for COVID, which was really inspiring to see. So we are pressing forward, our towns are pressing forward, and we'd love to work with additional communities within the Naugatuck Valley COG if there's interest. So I want to just touch on very quickly some supports we have for towns. The biggie up there, the easiest one, the old classic, is one-on-one support. If any town who's in the program has questions on anything, actions, deadlines, why we have what we have in the program, we'd love to chat with you. So we take phone calls, have emails, whatever it is, to connect with you on an ongoing basis. There doesn't need to be a gap. I will literally always be here at my little desk in my upstairs office, ready to connect with towns if you have any questions about sustainable CT. We have lots of events. They're all virtual now, which makes life easier, and we can do many more events than prior. But we try to have topical webinars or trainings on specific actions to help move through that action area. And as we get questions from towns on actions, how do we do sustainable procurement, for instance? We'll offer a training on that to help you with navigate that particular action. We have different consulting opportunities, so towns can work at no cost with different technical experts to help move through actions again. We have equity coaches on the team to help you do our equity actions. We've partnered with the Nature Conservancy to offer community resilience building workshops. And in this COG, I know Bristol and Woodbury have done the community resilience building workshops, and they were Really great sessions. We work with the utilities to help with energy benchmarking and so on and so forth. We also have fellows. So at this COG, we've had 2 fellows for the past few years who are providing direct support to towns. And we think they're great, but you're the ones who are working with them. So we hope that you're having the same experience, but they can help you identify where you have points scored, do actions, get your application in order, whatever it is. We, again, don't like to put bounds on the fellows. They have blown us away over the past several years, just their capacity and ability to learn our big program very, very quickly. And the last one on there is our community match fund, which I have just a few slides on. This is a matching program that we launched in September of 2019. So it's still pretty new, but we match for projects in any registered town. So if you're registered, you've met the bar, and any individual, nonprofit or not, in the town is eligible to put forth a project and receive up to $7,500 of matching funds, one-to-one. And the other $7,500 would come from small dollar donations within the community or from wherever. It doesn't have to be $7,500. If you have a smaller project, that's fine too. And we work with a group called Patronicity, which is like Kickstarter or GoFundMe. But the Patronicity team is great. So if you've got questions on how to raise the funds, they will work with you on how to do that effectively. Since September of 2019, 90 plus projects have been supported. The average project budget is about $15,000. We've had over 3,000 donors, and more than $1 million have been raised. So that's half from us, half from donations from across the state, across the country, and world. Actually, we've had some international donors come in as well. So the program has been pretty successful, and that's the intent, to get dollars out quickly, to see projects happening now. 53 towns have had projects in them, and you can see here some towns have had multiple projects, and it's first come, first serve. So if you're a town in the program, you've got project ideas, as long as the project leader is different, you can have multiple projects running simultaneously. At any rate, this is what a project page looks like, and this would be on the Patronicity website. Brantford has a clean energy campaign. They wrote up a couple paragraphs about the project, a couple photos to jazz up the page. They have a quick budget. That's it. That's all you have to do. There's no lengthy grant application process. You describe what your intent is, outline the budget again, maybe a photo or two, and then you begin to raise funds right away. And again, anyone in a registered town is eligible to put forth a project that aligns directly or indirectly with one of our 70 plus actions. And you saw the action category list, it's very broad. So it could be arts and culture, it could be community gardens, it could be energy campaigns. It really, the sky's the limit. And the intent of the Community Match Fund is to support projects that mean something to the community, that the community wants to see, and they're literally voting for those projects with their dollars, and creating a sense of ownership amongst the community with those projects. So we want to have a community garden in our neighborhood. Here's $5, let's make it happen. Now the community garden's in place. You know what? When you walk by that community garden, you have a little sense of ownership, sense of pride. It's part yours. So we're really grateful for our Community Match Fund supporters, as well as our general sustainable CT supporters. And I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, and I will stop the share.
We have time for a couple of questions before we go back to the presentation, if there's any. Okay, hearing none.
You can also type questions into the chat as we keep presenting.
Okay. Well, I will continue on. And before I get started on the regional and state initiatives for this planning process, I just want to remind people that you can enter into the chat which breakout room you'd like to participate in. Number 1 is riverine flood risks, repetitive loss properties and dams. Number 2 is actions for other hazards such as wind events and winter storms. And number 3 is Resilient Connecticut, which is the program that we're working with Circa on. We will actually have a slide in a few minutes about Resilient Connecticut. So if it's necessary to kind of hear more about it before you make up your mind, that is completely acceptable. Also, Victoria put a note in the chat box. If you're logged in and the device that you have is simply called someone's iPad, or if it's a phone number, just let us know who you are so we can write down who's attending and which towns are here. Okay, so we're going to, these are the this is a profile of the regional and state initiatives that we've been building into hazard mitigation plans over the past couple of years. And many of you who have existing plans, you all have existing plans, either one or two additions at this point. We did not take time to incorporate regional and state initiatives because they simply didn't exist. But in the past 5 years, the state has been doing a lot of work on different programs that fit very well into hazard mitigation plans. So we'll go through these: historic resources, repetitive lost properties, the state building code and how that affects the flood regulations. We'll talk about small businesses, which is a program that DEEP is involved with, sustainable CT, which we just heard about, the Resilient Connecticut project, and then low impact development for rural communities, which does not apply to all of the NVCOG towns, but to probably about a third of them. So the first big initiative, and this comes out of funding from Hurricane Sandy that the Connecticut State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO, used to look at historic resources and how to make them more resilient in 2016, 2017, 2018. And what we found working with SHPO and SHPO working with the communities is that it's very difficult to make historic and cultural resources withstand flooding and other hazards, because sometimes to do that, you end up affecting the characteristics that makes them historic to begin with. And so we have a couple actions that we're populating into hazard mitigation plans about historic resources. And we're starting, kind of in the early stages here. So we're not going to put actions into the plans that say elevate historic buildings. That would be inappropriate. So the actions that we have, there are two. The first action would be for all the towns, all 19 towns in the region. So coordinate with SHPO to conduct surveys to figure out if any historic and cultural resources are in hazard risk zones. And there is funding available from SHPO to do some survey work. So that's something that all the towns can look into. And then the second action would be for towns that already know that they have historic and cultural resources in flood zones. And that would be to work with SHPO to conduct outreach to find out how to make them more resilient going forward. So again, the goal here is to kind of take the statewide initiative and just kind of push it down into local hazard mitigation plans without being a big hammer. So the next initiative is repetitive lost properties. So these are the properties that have flood insurance and have made 2 or more claims in 10 years. There aren't a whole lot in the region. There's, I think, a couple hundred in Shelton, fewer than 100 in Waterbury. Southbury has a few. Bristol has a few. Some towns like Beacon Falls don't have any. And so what needs to happen, or eventually over time, with a list of repetitive lost properties is that it kind of gets cleaned up and becomes a more accurate reflection of risk in communities. So there's 2 actions that we have proposed for towns. One is for any town that has at least 1 RL property. So the action would be to work with DEEP, which is the state agency that is charged with being interfaced with FEMA. Work with DEEP to look at that list and figure out if the information is correct and if the property has been mitigated. For example, if it's been acquired or elevated, then to make that correction so it's no longer on the list in the same way that it is now. And then for towns that have 2 or more properties, the action would be to conduct outreach to those properties and actually the RL areas in general, which is kind of you put a boundary around the repetitive lost properties and expand it somewhat to include other properties. So instead of just 2 properties located next to a river, you might send a letter to 10 properties in that neighborhood. So that action would go to the towns that have a handful of RL properties. So again, kind of low lift, not too hard to send 1 letter over the next 5 years of the plan lifespan. The state building code was updated in 2018 and became effective later on that year. And it caused major changes to the state, to the flood regulations in the state. Perhaps in the past you have received an email from Diane Ivkovic at DEEP with model regulations, and she probably said, make sure you incorporate these into your local regulations. So that has been done in many communities, but some have yet to kind of catch up with that. So we have a couple different kinds of actions that we can put into the plan, and the choice of the action here would really depend on what's already been done in your local flood regulations. So the state building code now requires freeboard of at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation for new buildings and substantial improvement in all towns, whether you're coastal or riverine. And then a second action that we might put into a plan has to do with the look back for substantial damage, substantial improvement, which would help drive mitigation actions over time. And then the third action that we might sort of a catch-all use for some of the towns is just to take the state model regulations and compare them to your local regulations and make sure that they are consistent with one another. And again, many towns have already incorporated the new requirements from the state building code, so we'll be checking on that. DEEP, speaking of DEEP, they also have another program which they are hoping to push down into hazard mitigation plans. This one, I think, was born in 2017, 2018, thereabouts. And it's about spills that can occur at businesses when there's a flood or other natural hazard. And this is something that, entire states are looking at. For example, the state of New York is looking at this in the Catskills, where the drinking water supply for New York City resides, because businesses really can cause a lot of problems during the flood when spills occur. So there are 3 types of actions that we have developed working with DEEP on this program. And really the action that we use for your town will depend on how many small businesses you might have that could pose risks during a flood or other natural hazard. So if you're Bethlehem, we might give you action 1 or 2. Whereas if you're Waterbury, we might have you choose action number 3, which is about having DEEP come down and kind of host a workshop for municipal staff and local businesses about risks in flood zones. So again, we'll take a look at the type of community, how many businesses are in flood zones and other risk areas like wildfire risk areas, and try to provide a good fit between the community and the actions that we put in the plan. All right, we talked about this a few minutes ago. Jess Leclerc provided a really good update on a lot of slides that I hadn't seen before, so it's good to see there's new information out there about actions that are aligned with sustainable CT and hazard mitigation plans together. And this is just kind of an example of actions that we could put in the plan. So for the communities in NVCOG that are not currently in the program, we would give you a really simple action, which is to register as a community in sustainable CT program and then start to make progress. And so given that hazard mitigation plans have a 5-year look ahead, this is kind of a low lift action. We give you 5 years to consider registering and then start to make progress. And for those who are registered or certified, what we might do is put an action in your plan about kind of some of the specific actions that can be taken that are that provide co-benefits between being in the sustainable CT program and reducing losses from natural hazards. Okay, Resilient Connecticut. I think this is the last regional or state initiative before we go into breakout groups. So if you haven't decided, you still have about 2 minutes to decide. So this is a program that's being administered by CIRCA, which is the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation. It's funded by HUD through the Natural Disaster Resilience Competition. You've probably heard in the past a lot of the funding from HUD, from Hurricane Sandy, has gone to Bridgeport for some resilience projects. This is funding that went to the state and is being used for planning in New Haven and Fairfield counties, which are the 2 counties eligible for using the HUD funds from Hurricane Sandy. So the vision for Resilient Connecticut is these 8 bullets on the page. So adapt structures and critical infrastructure in flood zones to withstand flooding. And where we can't do that, look at providing protection from flooding and other hazards, and looking at really critical services, infrastructure, and transportation hubs. Make sure that when possible, they're developed on higher ground that doesn't flood and out of harm's way. The program also talks a lot about energy, economic, and social resilience. It speaks to transit connectivity. And there's really 2 terms that are kind of coming out of the program that CIRCA has developed. One is resilient corridors, which is kind of how to make connections between areas that are resilient so people can move between them before, during, and after disasters. And then resilient TOD, so transit-oriented development, is a big part of this program as well. And because it's money from HUD, we want to make sure we always remind folks that this is aligned with making sure that we develop affordable communities. So we don't want to develop resilience hubs and resilient TOD areas that are only for some of us. It needs to be development that is resilient and for all of us. There are a number of tasks in the Resilient Connecticut program. Here's kind of a synopsis of the tasks on the right-hand side. So there's a component which looks at regional infrastructure challenges and opportunities, identifying resilience corridors and resilient TOD opportunities. And for those of you in NVCOG who have TOD potential, you mostly know who you are. It's those folks aligned with the rail corridor, so the central Naugatuck Valley towns. The program would also identify projects that towns can't address on their own, and then develop implementable plans and pilot projects with broad co-benefits. So a really good example of what this program wants to do. This is an example from outside the region, but Meriden Green. So if you've been to Meriden, and if you're on the eastern side of NVCOG, you've probably passed through Meriden in the past. Perhaps you've heard of Meriden Green. This is a project that reduced flood damages going forward in downtown Meriden by creating a green open space next to transit-oriented development. So a lot of co-benefits at the Meriden Green project site. And if you can think of something parallel in the NVCOG region, it may be Freight Street or something like Freight Street. Perhaps Derby has an area, or Ansonia, or even Naugatuck near the railroad station near Route 8, where there's potential for development, and making it resilient is really what this program is getting at. You've probably heard us talk about this in the NVCOG board meetings, the COG meetings. You've heard us talk about it in the RPC and the TTAC, for example. And so we don't have a whole lot of slides in this segment about it because we've been talking about it in some of the NVCOG meetings. Again, here's the target communities. I already mentioned it's those that have the TOD potential. So in the NVCOG region, it's Waterbury down to Shelton. Perhaps you live in one of the other regions, so I'll just show you on the screen. If you're in the SCROG region, it's the blue communities, so Meriden down to New Haven, Milford over to Madison. In the MetroCOG region, it's Fairfield, Bridgeport, and Stratford. And then in the WestCOG region, the rail line kind of up to Danbury makes a lot of twists and turns. So Bethel, Reading, and Ridgefield and Wilton are all part of the program, as well as the southwestern corridor towns. Oh, we have one more, I lied. Low impact development for rural communities. So a couple of years ago, CIRCA provided funding to Northwest Hills COG and the town of Morris specifically to develop low impact development, sort of these policies, procedures, best practices really for communities that are rural. And why was this done? Well, you know, there's been a lot of work in cities like Hartford and Bridgeport on low impact development, and we kind of understand how to do that pretty well. If we have a really urbanized area, green roofs and street planters, that kind of thing. But sometimes it's more challenging to figure out what to do in an area that's very rural. So this manual was produced, and we thought it was a good fit for some of the rural NVCOG towns. And there are two kinds of actions that we could put in your plans. So for towns that already have some low impact development guidance, and then for those that do not. And again, this would be geared towards the rural communities. We wouldn't look to be recommending this manual in Waterbury, for example. Okay, so we're going to go ahead into the breakout rooms, and Victoria will place you into the room of your choice. I think what we'll do, we're running about 5 minutes ahead of schedule, which is good news for everybody. So we'll stay in the breakout rooms for 10 minutes. So Victoria, whatever time you put us in to the rooms, go ahead and set a 10-minute time frame. And it's going to take probably a good minute or two to get us into the rooms because there's about 30 or 40 of you on the call. I will go ahead and stop sharing at this point, and I will, you know, when we come back in for the wrap up, I'll reshare the screen.
Great. Okay, I'll put those. I've already organized most of the groups, so you should all get a notice to join. For those that haven't let me know, you'll stick around in the main room and I can add you to a room from there. I'll be leading the Resilient Connecticut room, so just give me a minute to get into that one. All right, I'll open those now.
hi everyone. Looks like, well, maybe some more people will end up joining us, but looks like we have a relatively small room. So the goal here is to, try to brainstorm some actions that we can include, or that you can include in your municipal annexes related to mitigating hazards from river flooding or dam failure, or perhaps other flooding from severe precipitation events, things like that. So maybe we'll start off. I know a lot of you have your cameras off, but maybe we can go around and just introduce yourself, say your name, where you're from, and why you chose this room specifically, or if you have any ideas right off the bat. So I'll start with, I'll say your name so that you can know when to talk. I'll start with Harley, if that works. You're muted.
Did you call me Dennis Cuevas?
No, Harley Graham, I think, if that's how you pronounce your name.
Hear me?
Yes, you're a little quiet, but I can hear you.
Okay. We have a river that runs through town. And sort of, since we're in the valley, we have two sides high in the river. Flooding will separate the land from the town. So that we have to have resources on both sides of the town. So that's one of the reasons of it flooding. Plus we have other brooks and streams that run through town, which have historically been flooding sites. We also are subject to a couple of private dams, which are up high, which if they leak will be a problem as they leak and flow down to the center of the city.
Okay, thanks.
Did you get it all?
It was a little hard to hear some of it. It was a little quiet, but well, I think I got some of it. There's a river that runs right through town, and maybe a river on the other side of town also, and some brooks that also cause flooding, and then there's a couple of dams upstream.
I'm gonna unhook my from my dock. It works better. Hold on.
Okay. All right, well, Harley, while you work on that, I'm going to go on to other people also. So next on my list is Garrigus. Is that your last name?
Oh, yeah, it's Mark Garrigus. I'm
Mark
the
Garrigus. Okay.
chairman for Wolcott's Inland Wetlands. And the last pieces that seem to people want to develop are down along our Mad River or some other floodplains. And we do have a few areas where housing was built 50, 60 years ago, and they don't have any flood elevation mapping done. So those few people, I'm trying to get that redone with Diane through the USGS surveys that are coming up, so that we can understand if they're in or if they're out, and what flooding concerns. So
Got it. Yeah, I think identifying flood areas and flood elevations would definitely be a good action for people to pursue and to have in the plan.
well, it's that, and then there's some general commercial areas where, not that I play policeman, but looking at aerial photos from year to year, all of a sudden there's like 4 acres of floodplain that are filled in. So it's interesting how things creep along. So.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Mark. So how about Stephen Schnell?
Hi, good morning. I'm actually on a video here somewhere. There we go.
Okay.
So I'm the new emergency management director for Southbury. So part of that, it was the last storm that we had. I know they've had historical losses based upon the Pomperaug River coming through. So I'm trying to wrap my head around all of that and get some plans in place for mitigation.
Okay, thanks. Rob?
Hi, good morning. Rob Langenauer, the City of Waterbury. I'm the Superintendent of Water for Waterbury. Some of my concerns are, river flooding in regards to water mains that are hung beneath the bridge. They're strapped to the bridge, or they cross the river themselves and have been a long time not maintained and not really cared about until there's an actual bridge replacement. But the flooding does create some concerns, especially with the scouring that takes place, and the river beds have kind of been misaligned and could be doing some more damage to the actual bridge itself, which will then eventually affect our water main. And we also have some dams that are active and on the Thomaston area and Warren, but also some of the dams that are more local that are still not used. I'll say not in commission, but they haven't been decommissioned. So, yes, we cut the grass, but what are we actually going to do with these dams that are still now in neighborhoods, basically, and could have an effect just because they're not active?
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
And Dennis?
Hi, Dennis Cuevas, work for Jacobs at the Waterbury Water Pollution Control Facility. My concern is obviously the Narcotic River. We have our main carrier that ran along and in the river itself. So obviously we have a problem when there's, when the river rises. We also have what is called a combined system. So when it rains, we get more water into our system to the point that in December, when we had that big storm, we actually had to use our stormwater bypass. So it gets to a point where we see the facility is actually designed for 27 MGD. We see sometimes double, and in that occasion, almost triple the flow. So 70 MGD coming in. So the plant is only able to handle some of it, and that's why it was built with a stormwater channel. So obviously the flooding and the extra water that comes in doesn't help our system.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and then Mark. We lost Harley.
Hi, I'm Mark Neuendorf from the Derby EMD. So Derby's where the town where the Housatonic and Naugatuck valleys converge before it heads to Long Island Sound. So historically we've had quite a bit of flooding. We've had a large number of commercial businesses that were built in what were historically floodplains that after the 55 floods, the areas were re-engineered by the the Army Corps of Engineers. So we're looking at failures down the road of things that are 50, 60, 70 years old. And we don't have the information of what's going to happen with some of these older structures that were put into place. So right now we're just investigating a couple neighborhoods and business areas that are more than likely high risk of flooding. We just don't have all the information. So we're just trying to put our ducks in a row and come up with plans for the possible catastrophe again, like we had in 55.
Yeah. Great, thanks. Well, thanks everyone. So, our goal again is to try to think of some mitigation actions to have in the plans. So do any of you have any actions that you are already planning to pursue to address any of these issues that you want to make sure get into the plan, or any specific issues that you're trying to look for mitigation actions? I mean, we listed some here, but we can try to get a little more specific about actions.
Well, this is Rob from Waterbury. I'd say, mitigation plan is, maintenance. especially on the rivers and streams on a smaller scale. Who's responsible for removing the couch or the trees that have fallen over time. We know where they are, especially in the more populated areas, but as you get further out, who's actually responsible for that, and how often is it done? And who would you call? Who would a resident call if they noticed something that fell down or came across, diverted the flows from somewhere else? I think that's the biggest thing with most of the rivers and streams locally. The resources that like DPW of Waterbury has is limited, and I'm sure the other communities as well. But there has to be a plan in place, and it's not. We have a plan to plow, we have a plan to remove leaves, we have a plan to cut the grass, but we have no plan to keep clear any of the tributaries, rivers, or streams that could end up doing some devastating damage.
Great, yeah. River debris maintenance plan. Great. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, this is Mark Kargas from Wolcott. I think my biggest challenge anyway is the undefined flood elevations in some of the areas, and impacts of areas that have been filled in or whatever, to like restudy and see what the real impacts are for adjacent property owners and alike. Also, a couple of bridge replacements to make sure that are in these areas, that they're high enough up that they'll still be part of the critical transportation structure to get back and forth from one high zone to the next.
Yeah.
Yeah, that goes along with, identifying critical facilities, in the floodplains, and knowing the elevations, obviously. In our facility, obviously, we try to respond. There was a survey done back 2 years ago from Yukon that tried to compile that information. So I think making that information available, would be something of importance.
That was a Yukon survey looking at like elevations of critical facilities in floodplains.
Yes, one that comes to mind in Waterbury is Harpers Ferry Pump Station that is along the Mad River tributary, and identifying it. When the I-84 was reconstructed, we actually were able to move that pump station, but where it was before, it actually was flooded when the riverbanks went over the floodplain. So we had issues in the past where we had to discharge sanitary sewer into the river, but now with the new pump station is able to handle it. But those are the type of critical infrastructures that I think should be identified.
Great, thanks. Have any of you pursued or have any interest in green infrastructure type approaches? Swales and drainage mitigation through natural approaches?
I do have, I guess, swales and whatever else questions, because any development that's just, say, outside the flood zone, they tend to just want to direct it all down after it comes out of a detention basin or whatever. So I'm looking for a more uniform spread under a major event, or absorption back into the ground during normal rainfall amounts.
Yeah.
It seems to be the challenge lately. Everybody wants to go the easy way. But
what I found just in my past career with drainage swales and any type of swale is that they're great when they're installed, but it all comes back to, who's going to maintain them, who's going to remove all the debris or anything else that falls into them, and then that's when everything gets a little gray. And the developer obviously is long gone, and that falls to the to the unfortunate town or utility or someone that doesn't have the resources and was never intended to have the resources. And it only happens after the fact, after you find there's an issue. So you always have to have that built into any type of swale. Swale's I think an easier solution, a cheaper solution, but not a maintenance wise solution.
Yeah, I'm actually going through that now with when our schools were added on to, and the assumption was that they'd be maintained, the detention basins even, and never happened because they were out of sight and out of mind, because they were back off into the near a wetland or within the wooded area that's not normally maintained. And we have, it's still functioning, but we have major trees growing out of the embankment that are now 6, 8, 10 inches in 15 years. So we're trying to come up with a plan through using town crew to go back through that. And then the other developments that were there, the developer, it finally finished and things are done, and it's 8 years later, and the overgrowth is who's going to take care of it?
Exactly.
And that's critical of managing, storm events. So.
Yeah, we had an experience up at Bradley Airport where I worked at MDC, and we had some sewer lines to go through the right of ways. And Ron Carey Parking is a large, obviously large parking authority up there, and they had 2 detention ponds. And guess what? They were both plugged, major flood, wiped out and washed out the whole right of way of where we had our 24-inch trunk sewer. And then ultimately, who had to go in there to support your utility and repair your utility was the MDC. We had to bear that cost and then try to capture it after the fact against whom. Was it Ron Carey Parking that had the detention pond? Who installed it? Who approved it? And ultimately, the utility ended up having to eat that cost because our trunk sewer was exposed for hundreds of feet. So we ran into a major issue, and we had to remove trees. The same issue that you're going to experience, Mark, is it's always after the fact, and how do you get there? And it's very costly.
It is.
Yeah.
Our sewer and water is actually doing a yearly walk on all our right of ways now. And they went and cleaned it up. And again, it was the same. There was an event and they couldn't get any equipment or anything down to the one of the manholes because the woods had filled back in over 20 years. So that's one thing we've done in town, but
that's a good start. And then you have to look at the real difficult areas. MDC did a study, and we were trying to get to all the right of ways for our water and mostly sewer, which was all along the Connecticut River. And the estimated cost to build access, roads to get to those places was $72 million. So, that's in the event of. So just to try to access your right of ways is nearly impossible. And then if there's a flood, is it sustainable? And, but it has to be done at some point. You're going to need to get in there. And that's when you have to, understand the costs.
yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. And I know the maintenance is definitely an issue. I'm wondering how we can word it as an action to put into, like a discrete action to put into a hazard mitigation plan. That might be something for us to think about more offline, because I think that our breakout rooms are going to close shortly.
Yeah, we got 56 seconds.
Okay, there you go. All right, any last words before we go back into the main room?
I just say I'm a firm believer in you just always have to factor in once it's built, who's going to fix it, and how often. I've dealt with a lot of flooding, and you got the state DOT to get out there. The one time everybody complained, and I would always say that's great, but when are they coming back, and how often are they coming back? So just because you got somebody there because Mark happened to be in charge at the time, and now Mark's retired, he leaves, who's next? It has to be part of a procedure, and it just can't be done from the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So it has to be, all right, they're here, when they coming back.
The yearly inspection should almost be like the quarterly or every half year generator run times that they're supposed to be recording, which I'm looking into that too for the critical structure.
There's Noah. Noah, your whole
I'm
room is
here.
back, okay?
Yes, we're all back.
You don't have Victoria yet.
Victoria's here.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. All right, let's do report outs. Riverine, you're up first.
Okay. Well, we talked about a lot of different things, so I'm trying to quickly review my notes here. So some of the concerns that people have relate to water mains going over bridges, and I suppose other utilities that go over that are kind of tied to the underside of bridges, and the risks to those from flooding and scour, and then more generally the risks to those bridges and road infrastructure that cross rivers. There is also some concern about dams that are not used, but are also have not been removed yet. So kind of just out of use dams that kind of pose this ongoing residual risk to downstream areas, but it's hard to get anything to happen to them. And then increased stormwater flow to wastewater treatment plants and combined sewer overflow systems that then can result in just direct discharges into the river. And then a significant thing that we talked about for a while is the idea of various mitigation structures like drainage swales being a key example, that we don't think enough about the long-term maintenance requirements and what that's going to cost, who's going to pay for it, who's going to be responsible for the maintenance, and how often are you going to go check them out and make sure that they're functioning properly, and then who pays for the damage caused by them if they fail. And there were a couple examples given. So I think that's most of what we talked about. Yeah. Oh, and sorry, also identifying critical facilities in risk zones and things like pump stations that are in flood zones.
Okay. So I was in the breakout room about wind events, winter storms, and other hazards, and some of the discussions kind of echoed earlier discussions that we've had in previous years. Points about making sure that utility liaisons are well known and understood to the municipal staff and officials, so that communication is not impaired before, during, and after events. Mike Maglione from Shelton was in our room, and I had forgotten that Shelton was a UI town, not Eversource, and he made a compelling case for tree trimming really causing a reduction in damage during events, and that was their experience in August this past year. He said that Shelton had kind of a less severe damage profile compared to other towns because of all the trimming that UI has done. We had a little discussion about the private sector needing generators such as gasoline service stations, and I made a plug for including some of those on the list of critical facilities, because that might be able to tee them up for funding for generators in the future. So that's all mostly related to wind and snow events, but we also had a discussion on landslides. We talked about Waterbury a little bit and the steep slopes and the risks associated, and talked about a lot of retaining walls and how attention is needed to make sure that they are maintained and properly designed, that sort of thing. We also touched on flooding a little bit because we were the catch-all room. We talked about culvert replacements that need to be done and kept up with. And but we also talked about the emerald ash borer, which tends to pop up in many discussions. And that's it. Victoria?
Yeah. So the Resilient Connecticut group had some pretty good conversations about potential development along some of the TOD areas, and kind of what the risks are and whether there were risks. So we talked a little bit about Main Street in Beacon Falls. They're in the process of moving some historic buildings. The question was raised of kind of, where do we start? So I said, let's get this information into the hazard mitigation plan, but this is a really great example of a zone of shared risk for resilient Connecticut. It's along the river. It's has TOD potential. The town is looking to kind of further develop this. And it's the same for Naugatuck and Derby as well. They're really looking to develop and, advance their TOD areas. Some pockets of, vulnerability, some areas are a little more protected than others. And then we had the conversation about, generators. Those are always municipal wide issues. Some specific sites that really need generators or upgrades. And then another good conversation about, some wind risks, right? With some communication radio towers. So I think overall, kind of a little smattering of everything there, but really highlighting the importance of, kind of this, zonal concern, kind of bringing it out from site specific to a more, regional issue. So I think those are kind of the overarching points. There was a few other main points, but I know we're running late here. But some good TOD conversation and risks and projects.
Great. Okay, so quick wrap up, then we'll let you all go. We'll just let you know what the next steps are. So if you have any comments about mitigation actions in general, especially think about the statewide and regional initiatives, for example, historic resources, the small businesses with the chemical spills, the rural low impact development. If you wake up in the middle of the night and think, that's just really not going to work for us, that's fine. Let us know. We are not here to make sure that every one of the 19 towns has every one of the actions that we've talked about today. It's your plan, and so we want to make sure that we reflect what you want to be in your list of actions accurately. We will go ahead and provide materials for review by the end of the winter. We'll have kind of two things to look at. There'll be the multi-jurisdiction document, which is the shared part of the plan, and then you'll all have a chapter or an annex that's about your community. So this will be a lot different than it was 5-6 years ago when you had an entire hazard mitigation plan to look at that was 200 pages. You will have a different set of options. You can look at a 100-page multi-jurisdiction plan or not, and you can look at your annex, which will be 30 pages. So you can kind of break it up differently, and it might be easier to review that way. Once we have everybody's edits in place, there'll be a couple of weeks available for public input to the draft plan. And that is about it. We do have actually, I should have mentioned, we have a public meeting next week, which is to present a lot of the material that we looked at today. That's on Thursday in the evening, and you can register or send information to other people to register if you go to NVCOG's page for this project for the hazard mitigation plan. And that's it. I will go ahead and stop sharing, and we'll take any final questions or comments. You can just unmute yourself. Quiet group. Thanks, Aaron. So Aaron put the link in the chat.
And we're trying to keep that up to date with all the most recent meeting announcements. And we'll get recordings of meetings up there as well.
Okay. And we won't come back together like this. So that's either good news or sad news if you'd like to come together like this, but we won't do this again, probably again in this project, but we might be meeting with you all individually if needed. Okay, everyone have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks.